you can keep yourself on mute. Thank you. If you can keep yourself on mute, we're going to have times for questions and answers. Oh, Louisa. Go ahead. Do you have a question?
I believe she's in the Spanish channel, but the question was who the other interpreter is. And the other interpreter is Gabby G. Okay.
So questions and answers will be at the end. So please put your questions in the chat box, and we'll get to them towards the end of the evening. So welcome to the second training for farmers and local food systems advocates on giving testimony. The legislative system can be daunting, so we will spend the first Tuesday of every month through January kind of peeling back these layers so you can feel confident sharing your important perspective going into the 2023 legislative session. So we're going to start with some introductions with Alice from FoFF and Ira from PCUN. And then we're going to, then they'll kind of roll into a discussion about giving testimony and why it's important. And then we'll get an OLIS demonstration from Laura from LPRO. And then finally, we'll go over in detail the oral and written testimonies so you can get kind of an idea of exactly how it works. So Alice, do you want to go ahead?
Hi, everybody. Welcome to our advocacy workshop tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Alice Morrison. I am one of the two co-directors of Friends of Family Farmers, and I am going to share my screen and tell you a very quick intro to FoFF. There we go. All right, so thank you for bearing with us as we're getting everything up and running. But this workshop tonight is put on by Friends of Family Farmers and PCUN, and I represent Friends of Family Farmers. We are a group that advances policy and programs to promote and sustain resilient and economically viable community agricultural systems in Oregon. So what that really means is that we are striving toward our vision that's up on the screen. We were founded back in 2005 by a group of farmers and rural residents who love their farmers in response to pressure that folks were feeling from corporate agribusiness and factory farms in their communities, and did not feel like there was any voice in the policy process for diversified, small, and locally focused farms here in Oregon that really are putting a triple bottom line for the well-being of their community, the well-being of their ecosystems, and running a viable business to keep stewarding their land and feeding their communities. How we go about this is through 3 avenues of programming. Programs that are exclusively for farmers, including our technical assistance programming. Then we have some programs that are for eaters to help put the word out and help folks really understand the nuance of community food systems and connect people with the farmers in their area that they want to support. And then advocacy is putting that all together and creating opportunities for farmers and eaters to change the system that shapes the food and agricultural processes that are the current paradigm. And so our farmer programs, the first is Oregon Pasture Network. That is our community of practice for pasture-based livestock producers. This presents community building, educational, and sales opportunities for its members, but also has classes that are open to the public and does general education on the value of prioritizing pasture-based animal production across the state. We currently have 83 members in that network, totaling about 9,500 acres in production. I know a couple of our Pasture Network members are on tonight. Hi, Sarah, thanks for coming. And if you're interested in joining that network, if you're currently producing animals for meat or fiber or what have you, go to www.oregonpasturenetwork.org and check out the application there. We also have Oregon Farm Link, which is a land linking site for land seekers and land holders to come together to keep farmland in production and find land security solutions for the next generation of farmers. We do operate the platform that is OregonFarmLink.org. You can make a listing there for seeking land, or if you are have some land that you would like to see in production, or you're trying to sell your farm and work on your succession plan, you can make a listing there. We also provide one-on-one technical assistance through our Navigate program. We currently are accepting applications for BIPOC farmers across the state in our Navigate program, the sector run by Sylvia Cuesta, who's here tonight, which is exclusively for BIPOC farmers in Oregon. We will also be launching a regionally specific section of the Navigate program well, very soon. We're hiring that person right now. All right. Here's a picture of some of the farms that we represent. This is an example of one of our Oregon Pasture Network community events where people go out to each other's farms and learn from their fellow farmers. And these are some of the cows at Nehalem River Ranch, which is one of our OPN members, run by our OPN Advisory Committee member, Jared. So yeah, the next thing we do for eaters is informations, which coincidentally, we have an information on Thursday. These are gatherings where farmers can engage directly with consumers on topics that interest and matter to their operation. We are going to be talking about one of our policy priorities for the upcoming legislative session. I know you all care about that because you're here tonight, which is raw milk. So we have a proposal to expand access to raw milk across the state and clear up some regulatory hurdles to make things easier for our farmers. And so if you're interested in hearing more about that policy and hearing from some of the farmers it impacts, please join us for the information on Thursday night. You'll hear more about that later. These are some of our eater-focused events. We used to run the Portland Fill Your Pantry. When we started that event, there were no year-round markets, but the market has evolved, and now there are year-round farmers markets in Portland that take that place. So this is what our informations used to look like before we moved them online, and their community gatherings. We do hope to sometime return to in-person events. We have a couple scheduled throughout the year, but our informations are something we're going to continue to do online so everyone can join in. And then we do advocacy. So here is a list of some of the campaigns and victories that we have had over the last decade and a half. We were instrumental in passing the Farm Direct Law, which allows people to bring, well, the Farm Direct Producer Processed Exemption in particular. We're also proposing some additions and changes to that law this coming session. Check out our website for more info. We were instrumental in passing the 1,000-bird exemption, which allows people to process chickens on farm. We helped to institute the small farms seat on the Board of Agriculture, which is an advisory meeting for an advisory presence for ODA to help set policy and regulation. We drafted the amendment that included a $2 million grant fund for small scale meat processing infrastructure in the state. That turned into the Meat Processing Infrastructure Grant Fund administered by ODA.
Hey, Alice, can you just slow down just a little bit?
Oh, sure, of course, sorry. So that was to expand meat processing options for small farmers who are bringing meat to farmers markets and selling pasture raised meats specifically to their community. That $2 million did go out to facilities earlier this year, and we are supporting a budget line item for $10 million to do it again, because processing is still one of the biggest bottlenecks that keeps people from bringing their product to market. We were instrumental in blocking the bovine manure tax credit, which was a very greenwash tax credit that primarily benefited factory farms who rely on seldom working methane digesters to offset their incredible climate impact. So we did away with that so that folks were not being compensated for using a model that creates an incredible amount of emissions. We're happy to talk about that later. And one of the campaigns that we are going to discuss tonight, we joined with our friends at PCUN. We joined their coalition to support farm worker overtime, which was passed earlier in the session, or in this year, in the 2022 legislative session, to build more equitable overtime policy for Oregon. These are some pictures from our rally day that we had at the Capitol. I believe these pictures are from 2019, back in the before times. We often gather people together to celebrate systems change for small farms, and will continue to do so. We are holding our rally on March 5th in Eugene at the new Eugene Lane County Farmers Market Pavilion, which is an entire city block right across the street from the courthouse. And it's a joint effort between us, the farmers market, and the city of Eugene to bring more eyes and ears and voices to small farm policy. So look forward to that. And that's FoFF. That's the end of my presentation, and I will stop sharing. Now I'm going to hand it over to Ira to introduce PCUN and the work that they do.
Thanks, Alice. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ira Cuello Martinez. I use he, him pronouns. I am the Policy and Advocacy Director at PCUN, Oregon's Farm Worker Union. For folks who don't know, PCUN stands for Pineros y Campesinos Unidos del Noroeste, which in English translates to Tree Planters and Farm Workers United in the Northwest. We are a farm workers union based out of Woodburn, Oregon, in Marion County, which happens to have the largest farm worker population in the state. It's a very agricultural dense county, and Woodburn is really a great city to visit and be to see the agricultural landscape as well as other parts of the state. Our mission at PCUN is to empower farm workers and working Latinx families in Oregon through 3 different methods: community organizing, by increasing Latinx representation and elections, and through policy advocacy on both the national and state levels. We envision an Oregon where farm workers and Latinx working families are empowered and have a say in the decisions that affect them, both in the workplace and in the communities where they live. So that's a brief overview of PCUN and who we are and where we're based, and our mission. If it's okay with folks, I'm happy to share about why it's important to be engaged in the legislative session, and particularly with written and oral testimonies that are used throughout the session. As the Farm Workers Union that primarily serves Spanish-speaking communities, it has been, the legislative session has been an inaccessible place for many of our members who often don't know how the legislative session system works in our state, which oftentimes dictates and decides on issues and policies that affect them. Through PCUN, we're able to engage our membership by informing them about policies that are being proposed, policy concepts that our membership would like to also introduce in the legislative session, and how they can voice their opinions when it comes to important policies, concepts, and discussions in the legislative session. Written and oral testimony is one of the biggest ways that PCUN engages in the legislative session. We have a membership of many farm workers, and we do a lot of outreach and phone banking to ensure that they know about what is happening in the session, as well as being able to have them share their testimony so we can submit it for the public record and have a say when it comes to public hearings and other opportunities to share the community's input on specific issues. For instance, if we take the farm worker overtime campaign that was referenced earlier and we'll continue talking about later in the workshop, it was very clear to our members that farm worker overtime is a policy they would like to see passed in Oregon after seeing it passed both in Washington and in California, and receive wages that every other worker receives after a 40-hour work week. And the way the members engaged with the legislative session is that they contacted PCUN. We reached out to workers, and they're sharing their stories about why it's important for them to receive overtime wages, and you can hear a lot of these stories and reasons and testimonies during the public hearings. Oftentimes, it's difficult for farm workers to take a day off to go to the Capitol and spend a day talking to their legislators. So being able to share their testimony is another way and method for them to engage in a way that doesn't commit them to go to the Capitol and spend an entire day talking with legislators when they can share their story and continue doing some of the essential work that the agricultural industry focuses on in our state. So I'll take a pause there and also let Alice share some of the reasons why FoFF, Friends of Family Farmers, also believe that testimonies and community engagement is important and crucial when it comes to participating in the legislative session.
Thank you, Ira. Yes, I think that one of the biggest things that comes from the testimony that we help folks give during the legislative session on the issues that impact them most is that it helps legislators understand the day-to-day impact of the bills that they're passing, that they're discussing. It becomes not a hypothetical, but a concrete lived experience in front of them. So I think that that's something that I want to drive home, is that it's not just important for advocates like myself or for Ira to represent lots of folks while giving testimony. It's really impactful and really important for folks individuals who are living lives that interact with these laws every day, to give their testimony and tell their story, because there are so many statistics, there are so many broad statements floating around during the legislative session that it's so important for lawmakers who have maybe never set foot on a farm or don't have experience living rurally, or they have never been a farm worker, they have never been a farmer or rancher, they don't identify with agriculture at all, it's not in their skill set. But for them to have a story to connect to and someone to reference when they think about this bill is incredibly important, especially if you are someone who has a legislator in a certain committee who is your legislator. That can be really impactful as well, because then they know that this is something that happens in their district. I want to emphasize, I think we'll hear later from some other speakers that, legislators are just people. They all come with their own lived experience and their own expertise. And most of them do not have any agricultural expertise at all. On the farmer side, on the farm worker side, they have never lived that life. So hearing from people who have that lived experience is really important. And it's a huge part of how we plan our campaigns. And I know that Ira and I have worked together to make it as easy as possible for folks to give testimony. And we're so excited that you're here with us tonight to learn about the process, but also know that we are available. Myself, Ira, Brittany, his colleague Liz are around to help you through the process, help you develop your testimony, make sure you know about opportunities to testify, and to encourage you on which parts you want to include. If you have any questions at all, that's what we're here to do, is to make it more accessible and easier. And also, I'm so excited, we'll hear from Laura about this a little later, but I'm so excited that it is going to be a hybrid session. So there will be opportunities to testify remotely throughout the session, even though the building is open. So if you are worried about making the journey to Salem to give your testimony, fear not, you can still give virtual testimony orally, and you can always submit written testimony as well. But you don't have to drop everything and go to Salem just because the building is open. There will still be opportunities, and we'd love to connect you to them. So I think we're at time for this section. So Brittany, I'll hand it back over to you.
Yeah, great. And anything else to add, Ira? Or, well, you can follow up in the next section too. So next up is Taylor. Taylor Sarment works with FoFF, and we hired him through Mahonia Public Affairs. And he's going to be here talking with you, walking you through kind of the process and how testimony fits in. So Taylor, and feel free to share your screen too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Brittany. Great to see so many familiar faces again. Like Brittany said, Taylor Sarman, I use he, him pronouns. And I have my colleague, Heather Rockwell on here as well, who helps support Friends of Family Farmers advocacy work on behalf of the organization. And I know we're running a little bit behind and we've got a really great program for folks. So I will try and speed through my little portion so that we can get back on time and hear from the rest of the folks we have on the agenda. My computer says that I am not able to share my screen, Brittany. Still not able. All right, there we go. So what I thought I would do is, can folks see this handy dandy and very complicated chart? Great. So as you can see, and I think as Alice and Ira and others have talked about, there's really a lot that goes into successfully passing a piece of legislation. But and one of the things, the reasons that I'm so glad that FoFF is putting on this presentation is because this, as you can see, we start over here and we work ourselves all the way down to what I think is one of the most important aspects of the process, and that really is the committee holding a public hearing. And that's when you all and other constituent groups get the opportunity to speak directly to legislators that get to make decisions about these pieces of legislation and what comes before the committee. And Alice already alluded to this. That's one of the most impactful things that you all can do, is sharing your story to those folks. And then, of course, because it wouldn't be uncomplicated, you have to do it again in the legislative process once the bill passes the chamber that it originated in. So there's actually two opportunities, which further emphasizes why this is such a great opportunity for you all to learn a little bit more about testimony and testifying before the legislature, because once we do it the first time, we have to start all over and do it again down here on the second public hearing for a whole different set of legislators. I thought I'd give a quick overview on the timing, just so folks can start planning in their personal calendars. But the legislature is set to come in on January 17th. And then shortly after that, there will be plenty of public testimony opportunities for folks between January and sometimes all the way up to the very end of June, when the legislature is set to adjourn or finish its business for the year. And usually I always like to flag for people, it's really the middle of March, early part of April that usually is the first crunch time where getting your testimony in is so important. And then that's kind of the first crunch time. And then I think it's usually around the middle of May, which is the second crunch time, where there's lots of good opportunities for you all to testify. So that's just a quick overview of the process and some timing. And with that, I have successfully got us to our next 6:30 presentation. So I'll stop talking and hand it back over to Brittany.
All right, we're really excited that Laura can join us. Laura Kentness is a principal legislative analyst for Legislative Policy and Research Office, often called LPRO. It's a nonpartisan agency that provides policy research, facilitation, and committee services. Laura's practice area is natural resources and the environment, and she's worked in agriculture, forestry, wildfire, land use, water, fish and wildlife, and other related topics during her 6 years at the Oregon legislature. So they're here to just walk through and give you some tips. And OLIS is such a really daunting process. I'm so excited that you're here to show us how to navigate. So welcome, Laura.
Yeah, thanks, Brittany. And hi, everybody. Pleasure to be here. Quick logistical question, Brittany. Do you know? Yeah, great. Heather's got slides for me.
I've got your slides up. So you let me know, Laura, when to move on, and I will do that.
That sounds great. Can you actually, do you mind, Heather, taking them down just for a moment so I can say hi to everyone first? Thank you. That's great. Thanks for being my support team, Heather. A quick hi to everybody. As Brittany said, I work for an organization called the Legislative Policy and Research Office. We also are known as LPRO, if you want the insider lingo at the Capitol as you're navigating over there. I just want to say it's a pleasure to be here. It's really one of the nicest parts of my job when I get to be out of some of the day-to-day of the Capitol and get to say hello to groups and talk about access to the public. And that's a topic that we have been thinking a lot about because we're process people over at the Capitol. And as some of the other speakers alluded to, before COVID, we had a fully in-person operation. Let me just give you the sweeps of what you're walking into this session. We were fully in person. What that meant is people were at that gray Capitol domed building. Legislators, committees, floor sessions were all happening in person. If you were a member of the public and wanted to come testify, you were maybe driving 30 minutes to get there or 7 hours to get there, depending on where you live. You were giving between 2 minutes of testimony to maybe 5 or 10 for that length of time. And so occasionally we would have phone testimony for people to call in that way, but we were pretty outdated technologically, maybe unsurprisingly, which made access pretty tricky. So fast forward to COVID, and what it's looked like is the opposite. We've been totally remote, especially for the committee process. So that means we've been using a system like this. We've been using the Microsoft Teams platform during that time. And if you as a member of the public wanted to participate, you would let us know in a certain system and way, and then you'd get a link to a meeting like this. And from wherever you were, you could just show up and have your voice heard at the Capitol. And so here's where we are now, starting tomorrow, literally tomorrow, there's 3 days of informational meetings at the Capitol that are going to be hybrid, merging those two systems together. And it's intended to be kind of a trial run for what the legislative session is going to look like starting in January. And I imagine you all are wondering what does hybrid actually mean? So I'm hoping I shed some light on that to the best of my knowledge at this point. And so what hybrid looks like is this: when you show up, whether that's remotely or in person in January or afterwards, all the legislators are going to be at the Capitol. You're going to see committee hearings. I think you have some video clips maybe later in this training where there's a committee room, there's a big table called a dais. All the legislators are there in person, staff are there in person. But if you are a member of the public, you're going to have two options. You can come in, you can be present in the room and delivering testimony orally, or just sitting in the room and listening or showing your support by just physically being there and being another body in the room, whatever that looks like for you. Or you can participate remotely. And so that in-person meeting room is also going to have a huge screen. And as one representative said this summer, it's going to be like a wall of faces. And we're going to have both that are operating in the same space. So legislators that are there in person are going to see someone in front of them physically or someone up on the wall delivering that testimony. And I feel I was going to say a couple words about the meaning of your being there. Alice and Ira just did a beautiful job talking about the impact. So maybe I can just affirm and say, it's, especially as somebody from the inside, a staff person, it is your voices actually at the Capitol that bring issues and ideas and problems to legislators' attention. A lot of times they don't know what you see in your lives and in your communities, in your businesses. I would say we legislators and staff spend a lot of time reading black and white legal text, right? We have hundreds of pages of bills and other things that we're wading through, and it's your voices that give color to that. I think, as Alice said, it's your lived experiences that bring that black and white text to life and help legislators wade through. Does this policy idea make sense? Should it be changed in some way? So you are really meaningful to the process. And I think what's most valuable with my time with you today is to help you understand how to access the process and where to find information that you need to be effective. So Heather, if you could toss up that slide deck for me. I just have some pictures to showcase for you to help walk through the legislative website. Okay, next slide, Heather.
Well, my computer froze, of course. Let's see if I can. 1 second.
No worries. Oh, I think it's because you're on the last slide. So maybe you're at the end of the presentation.
Go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Try that again. There we go.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, that's where we want to be. Thanks, Heather. So you all are in the great position that you are members of an advocacy organization that has their act together in terms of knowing how to access bills that you want to track, knowing which committees might hear them, when a bill is going to be heard in a meeting. Friends of Family Farmers, PCUN, other organizations are going to help to give you that information. But for the purposes of this training, let's approach this from the position of you're a member of the public that's not connected at all. How do you do this self-sufficiently? So if you're starting with, I know there's a raw milk bill in the legislature, and I want to be able to follow it. How do I do that? So what you see in front of you is the legislative website. If you were to Google Oregon legislature, this is what would pop up. So this is step one. I've circled a couple of the key things to orient you, but just very briefly, if we start in the top left corner, there's a series of tabs along the top. In the future, on your own time, these provide you useful information. If you click on the Senate, you're going to get a bunch of links to all the senators in the state. You're going to be able to find who yours is if you don't know. If you click on House, same thing. If you go to the end of that row of tabs, Capitol offices, that's links to people like my agency, the fiscal office, the budget office, Legislative Commission on Indian Services, a bunch of links to get you to useful resources that you might find helpful. But those middle two tabs, once you start poking around in bills and laws, in committees, what you'll find is they're just hyperlinking you to the same place, which is called OLIS, which Alice mentioned. So that red circle around OLIS is where I'm going to take us next to discover what's in there. Next slide, Heather. Yeah. So kind of not the most user-friendly modern public website you've ever seen. This kind of looks like the homepage, but it's its own system. It's called OLIS. You can see up in that upper left-hand corner, the yellow text, Oregon Legislative Information System. This is like our mega database of where all the information lives about the legislative process. The things I want you to be aware of to navigate this effectively instead of drive yourself crazy are the following. Up in the upper left-hand corner, that circle, 2021-2022 interim, I, as a person that's super familiar with the system, always start there to understand what time frame in this big database I'm operating in. And so for those of you that don't know, when we talk about the legislative session, that's a limited period of time in the calendar year. That's when everybody in January is going to come together on January 17th and be a part of the bill process, voting, passing laws. When we're not in session, which will end in June next year, the second half of the year is called the interim. So just know that this whole system, OLIS, is operating on two parts of the calendar year, either the legislative session or the interim. Up in the upper right-hand corner are the most useful tabs for you. Session, bills, and committees. And Heather, if we can go to the next slide, I'll show you what those do. So here they each are. Again, probably the most important place to start, definitively the most important place to start is in this left side of the screen called session. And this is what I was talking about. You can see in that list of drop-down hyperlinks, you've got session, 2022 session. We've had a couple special sessions. Then you've got interim. And then you go on to the next sessions. The reason this matters is you need to identify what time period you're looking in for anything related to bills and anything related to committees. So if I'm going to look in the House Agriculture Committee and I don't see anything in there, it might be because I'm in the interim instead of the legislative session. So just be aware of what time frame you're in is step one. Step two, to start looking into these other two parts of the screen, bills and committees. So you're a member of the public, you care about raw milk bill, you heard on some program on the radio that some organization is pushing for changes to regulations in that area, but you don't know what the bill number is, you don't know how to find any information about it. You can go to this middle column called bills, and you can see right under that red circle, there's a couple tabs. If you know the bill number, you can look it up there. You can see all those numbers. Right next to that is a little gold tab called bill text. So this is where you, in this situation, might say, great, I'm going to click on bill text and type in the search engine raw milk. And it's going to spit out a bill number or two for you. That's going to help you navigate the system. So let's say we do that and we discover that raw milk is House Bill 1234. Great. That's going to help us navigate other parts of the system. There's a third tab on there that you'll notice is bill sponsor. So if you know that's the legislator that is sponsoring the bill, if you know who it is that is advocating for that bill, that's just another way to find it. But keyword will usually get you there. Here's the last column on that screen, committees. This is where you might want to go. Let's say you know you're interested in agricultural issues and you're just curious, what is it that the House Agriculture, Land Use and Water Committee is up to in this next week of the legislative session? Maybe on February 1st, you're curious to kind of sneak preview what's coming up. You can click on that Agriculture, Land Use and Water Committee link. That's another way to go. Next slide, please, Heather. Okay, so this is where we're going to get into just a couple minutes of, you know that you've got raw milk, which is House Bill 1234. You know that it's probably going to be in an agriculture committee. Here is a link you can see right at the top, 2022 regular session. We'll pretend that says 2023. And this is the House Committee on Agriculture, Land Use and Water. So if you were to click on that link from the previous page, this is what the committee pages look like. It's showing you a bunch of text in that main area. That's the beginning of a legislative agenda. You can see right at the bottom of the page, it says public hearing. And let's imagine that that says House Bill 1234, raw milk, is going to be up for a legislative hearing. You can see on the right side, this is where we keep track of all the meetings. So this is on February 9th. It looks like there's a public hearing on the raw milk bill in our imagination. Here's the things I just want to point out to you. So you're that citizen sitting at home. It's February 1st, and you see in 9 days, there's going to be a public hearing on a bill that you care about. The question is, how do I give voice to my support for this bill? You've got two options through the formal committee process. Number one, you can submit written testimony. Maybe you don't want to go to Salem, you don't want to be on a camera, but you want to write a letter of support. The way you would do that is a system that is still being finalized, so I can't show it to you, but there will be a link on this screen that says submit written testimony. It should be really easy to see, really easy to identify. And then if you look in that gray tabs, kind of in the middle top of the screen, it says agenda, meeting materials. Ultimately, the testimony that you submit will be populated by the system in meeting materials so that all of the letters of support or opposition are found there. Similarly, your other option is to verbally testify or orally testify, and there will be a very clear link on this screen. So anything attached to the meeting agenda or the committee that will just say, register to testify here. And that's how you go about signing up. Again, sorry, I can't show you the finalized system that is not live, but Heather, if you go to the next page, this is kind of a sneak preview of what you will see if you're interested in doing verbal testimony, you'll see this is kind of a mock-up, but you'll see a screen that gives you the ability to punch in your name, the city where you live, the location of where you want to testify. So you'll be able to select in person or remote, an organization if you so choose. When you've registered, this is the right side of the screen, will give you this little pop-up that says really clearly, you've successfully registered to testify. There's that bill number or measure number at the top. We'll pretend it says House Bill 1234. It'll give all the information. If you're registering to do this remotely, to be a part of that wall of faces in the room, the pop-up that goes to you and the confirmation email will include the link that you'll need to follow. So either way, it'll come back to you. Heather, next slide, please. This is just a quick screenshot. If you did that option of submitting written testimony in OLIS under the meeting materials link, you'll just see, and the public and legislators will be able to see a list of all the people that submitted, the city where they live, and this blue hyperlink on the left is your actual written letter. So everybody can see it, it's posted publicly. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is just back to that same orientation page where we started. If you were to Google the Oregon Legislature, and I just wanted to point out one or two quick things and then I'm done. I circled in the bottom left just today's events at the Capitol. Sometimes that's just a nice way to orient yourself to what's happening today. You can, in the big picture, yeah, I care about agriculture and the raw milk bill, but I'm also curious what's happening in housing, or I'm just, and so it's an easy way to navigate. But the big thing I want to direct you to is your second area of this website of interest will be the Get Involved tab at the top. And Heather, next slide will just give us one last screenshot of what's on that tab. This is like the resources for that self-sufficient public citizen that doesn't have an organization pointing them in all the right directions. On that left side, there's a tab, How to Testify Remotely. We are in the process of updating that periodically over these next couple weeks to reflect all the latest things on hybrid meetings. How to submit testimony. Language services, Ira, you were just talking about that from PCUN's perspective. LPRO has been working very hard to get ASL interpreters on board for every meeting. We now have 2 full-time Spanish translation services specialists on staff. We have access to a lot more translators and a lot more languages that will be consistently part of these new hybrid meetings. And last thing to draw your attention to is on the bottom right, e-subscribe. I can't recommend this more highly. This is the automated way of plugging in, I want to track House Bill 1234, and an email system will let you know every time the bill's been scheduled for an activity, like a public hearing. So you don't have to go on the website every couple days checking it, but they will tell you, an automated process will tell you every time that something's happening with the bill. So it's nice to sign up for those services if you want the quick and dirty. And Heather, that is my last slide, actually. Yeah, because my understanding is the next presenter is going to talk about how to do great oral and written testimony. So if you can pull that down, for the organizers, if there's time for a quick question or two, I'm happy to take it, but I hope that was a useful overview.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. We do have a couple of minutes for questions if any folks on here want to unmute yourself and ask a question. Now is the time.
It can feel kind of like a lot to get oriented. There's a lot of website screens to move yourself through, but I think for folks like Alice and Taylor and Ira and others that are used to the legislature, if you even spend 10 minutes just kind of going through those few tabs that I showed and just getting familiar, it'll be pretty fast to navigate yourself around, I think, and feel a lot less daunting.
All right, if nobody has any
I'm
questions,
sorry, I have a question. I was getting kids oriented with dinner.
go for it.
And I apologize if you missed it, because again, managing children. Did you say when the site will be updated with the upcoming session information, like when we can expect to see that available?
Yeah, great question. Everybody is hoping to know the answer to that as soon as possible. What I do know and can share with you is there's a couple of different things at play in terms of timing of posting on the website. One is we're not going to know the actual committees for this upcoming legislative session. They typically change in terms of which topics are clustered and what members are assigned to them. We probably won't know until the end of this month. It seems to kind of get later and later each year. And so that's one piece of timing. Another piece is when bills actually get assigned numbers and populate into OLIS so that you could actually find a link that says 2023 legislative session and can see all the bills. That often happens the first or second week of January. So that's when you can expect to actually be able to successfully navigate through all those links. In terms of the Get Involved page and updates to the How Do I Testify, that will also be coming probably the first or second week of January, all in advance of the legislative process starting on the 17th, but later than most people want it to. Hope that helps.
Yes, that is very helpful. Thank you.
All right, if there's not any other questions, we'll move on. Thank you, Laura. That was such
Yeah.
great information.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, we're going to move on and kind of break down the oral testimony and written testimony. We'll talk first about oral testimony, and maybe Ira and Taylor can kind of jump in and talk a little bit about the essential components of what goes into oral testimony, and then we'll stop and show short videos of 3 different testimonies just so you can see what they look like. And then we'll kind of go over and do some reflections and figure out some common themes and discuss afterwards. So Ira, do you want to go ahead and talk about kind of the meat of oral testimony and what are the important aspects that you do not want to forget to include?
Yeah, I can share briefly, and I guess before starting off, I am curious to see if anyone in this space has testified before or written a testimony or a policy that's being proposed in a legislative session. Okay, so it looks like a few of you have already experienced providing testimony and testifying in front of a committee, which is great. And we'll be looking towards you all to also provide any pointers, tips, and experiences that you have had. And for those of you who haven't, I really hope that you share any questions, concerns, doubts that you have, so that once 2023 comes around and the session starts, you can also be able to share your thoughts and opinions on a certain issue. So when it comes to a testimony, it's very important that you address the committee that you're testifying in front of. So as mentioned in the presentation, there are several different committees that focuses on different issue areas and topic areas. And once those public hearings are being scheduled out, it's important that when you sign up to testify and you're preparing your testimony, one of the first things you want to do is address the committee chairs, as well as the rest of the committee. For instance, when we are testifying, when we have testified previously in the Senate Business and Labor Committee, the chair of that committee is Senator Taylor. So you would address the chair as well as the vice chair, saying, "Dear Chair Taylor and Vice Chair Knope, and members of the House, the Senate Business and Labor Committee." so you know who exactly you're talking to when testifying in front of that committee. And then you introduce yourself, who you are. My name is Ira Cuello Martinez. I live in Salem, Oregon, and I'm here to talk to you about LC 1234, the raw milk policy that's being discussed today. And after you provide, you introduce yourself and who you are, you can dive right into why this issue is important to you and what stance that you have on it, whether you support or not support the policy, and give explaining your reasons for supporting or not supporting a specific bill concept. And then after you provide your reasons for why you have that stance, it's very important and crucial that you conclude your testimony by explicitly stating, I want you to vote in favor or vote against. In this case, we want them to vote in favor of LC 1234, the raw milk bill. This will signify to the committee how many folks are in support and how many folks are in opposition towards a specific bill concept. So those are some of the components, and as we're watching the testimonies that will be shared here soon, keep in mind, what are some commonalities that you're seeing in between the testimonies? What are things that you really like or you thought it was very effective that they shared in their testimony, and just being able to share and reflect on how the person is testifying in front of a committee. So Brittany, if you can help with getting those videos up, and then we can begin discussing after each testimony, what are people's thoughts, opinions, reactions to what is being shared with you all.
Yes, I will get that right now. All right, we've got 3 to share. So we'll go through all 3 of them and then we'll stop and discuss.
Co-chairs Taylor and Holvey and members of the committee. My name is Kate Crowley and I am speaking today on behalf of my farm by invitation from Friends of Family Farmers. I am once again testifying in support of farm worker overtime. In solidarity with our local farm worker union, PCUN, I agree that the proposed 5-year transition period is too long, but I do appreciate and applaud legislators' efforts to make the transition to new business models easier for other farmers as they make changes to accommodate overtime protections. Overtime laws exist to protect workers from exploitation by discouraging employers from overworking their employees. During the last heat wave, we saw that farm workers in our state are subject to dangerous imperatives to sacrifice their own health and safety when Sebastian Francisco Perez died moving irrigation equipment in record heat. This tragedy is emblematic of the pressures farm workers face to maximize their hours in effort to support themselves on low wages, and it exposes a disregard for human life implicit in creating exclusions from labor rights for certain workers. Currently, 10 to 12-hour days or longer are not uncommon. Spending this much time performing physical labor leaves little to no time or energy for being with family and friends, attending necessary appointments, enjoying a hobby, or even resting to prepare for another demanding day on the job. I now run a pastured livestock operation, but I spent the past decade working on field crews for other farms, and I know firsthand how physically, mentally, and emotionally depleting it is to work for more than 40 hours a week consistently and have only poverty wages to show for it. I sustained injuries doing this work in my 20s, and I can only imagine the toll that working such long hours takes on people who are older and have the additional responsibility of supporting a family. Farm owners, like any other employer, are responsible for paying necessary production expenses. It's time for the farming community to acknowledge that this includes paying people a living wage. Humans are not an expendable resource, and it's not okay for any employer, including farmers, to subject people to overwork. When we started our farm, we knew we wouldn't be able to afford paying people fairly yet. So we created systems we could operate by ourselves until we could do so. Because of our lived experience as farmhands, we have made intentional decisions. It's one thing to work overtime for yourself and build equity in your own business, but it's quite another to have other people exhaust themselves on your behalf for minimum wage or even less. I will wrap up very quickly and say that farms can be price makers. It will likely mean shifting away from commodity models or diversifying production for some, which are changes that will have additional environmental and social benefits in our rural communities. I want to say it is possible, and Oregon farmers can rise to the challenge. So I urge you to pass farm worker overtime. It is the right thing to do. Thank you.
Just 1 second, I gotta get to the.
While Brittany is finding the next clip, Ira, do you have any comments about Kate's testimony? Anything that stuck out to you as particularly emblematic of the things you just said?
Yeah, so in Kate's first testimony, you can hear her address the committee and introduce herself at the very beginning of her testimony, as well as provide her stance on the bill that was being discussed, in this case, farm worker overtime, and afterwards being able to give the reasonings why she believes farm worker overtime should be passed, and concluding with the explicit ask what she wants this committee to vote, in this case, in favor of farm worker overtime. And I will note, you heard in the video time, which means, as stated earlier, you do have a limited amount of time in most cases to share your testimony. And so as you're preparing your testimony, it is important to try to time yourself and be ready in case your time is cut short, and being able to give the concluding statements and thoughts and where you want the committee to vote on the specific bill. So yeah, I think we can also show the next clip, and seeing how things are similar and different on the next person who's providing testimony.
To support you and back you up, and I hope that you will take time that is needed to create a better solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Jim Bronick, please, and then next Denver Pugh, please.
Hi, thank you, co-chairs and committee members, for allowing me to speak to you today. My name is Jim Bronick of Praying Mantis Farm in Canby, and I'm a third-generation farmer, and I'm asking you to support the passage of House Bill 4002. Agriculture in Oregon is such an important industry in our state, supporting and creating jobs for many. I myself love farming and wish to support farmers and farm workers in our great state. Farm workers in particular, for too long, have been unfairly compensated for their work and labor. It is time to change that. We live in a world where farm workers are free to take their labor to neighboring states that do pay time and a half for overtime, and will do so in this tight labor market. If states are not willing to pay workers in fairness and justice, then they will rightly go elsewhere. This will hurt Oregon agriculture. We have to keep Oregon competitive in a labor market. My faith tradition calls me to treat others as I would want myself to be treated. I want for our skilled frontline farm workers in Oregon to be treated and paid justly for their work. And House Bill 4002 is a step in that direction. Which one of us would advise someone we love, our children, for example, to take a job that does not pay time and a half for overtime work? I would not, would you? Why would we expect others to do so for our businesses? It is simply unjust. We can pay it. We can make Oregon agriculture stronger for both farmers and farm workers, and we can create a better future for all our people involved in agriculture. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify.
Thank you. Next up, we have
Okay, one more.
Fine.
okay.
And I am ready to interpret whenever she is.
Chair Taylor, some folks on the phone don't know how to unmute themselves.
Okay, *6.
Bueno,
Yes, we can hear you.
ok. Mi nombre es Rubí. Soy ama de casa, pero mi esposo es campesino y trabaja en hortería por 10 años. Este campesina fueron tiempos horribles trabajar cuando mis niños eran bebés. Por falta de dinero, tuve que trabajar semanas después que nacieron mis hijos y yo me llenaba de leche cuando trabajaba en la pizca de la manzana. Mientras mi hija se quedaba en cuidado, yo iba a darle de comer durante mi lonche. Pero de que tan caliente estaba mis pechos y la leche le hizo daño a mi hija y se me enfermó. Mi hija...
Voy a traducir por usted en un momento, ¿ok?
Sí, ok. ¿Lo pueden leer otra vez?
Sí, yo lo puedo traducir, está bien. She said, my name is Ruby. I am a housewife, and my husband has been a nursery farm worker for 10 years. I write to urge you to support the payment of overtime for farm workers after 40 hours. A while ago, I was a farm worker too. Those were horrible times when I had to work when my children were babies. Due to the lack of money, I had to work weeks after my children were born. I would get soaked in breast milk when I worked in the fields while my daughter stayed in daycare. I would go feed her during my lunch, but it was so hot and my milk was warm that my daughter would get sick. It was a very emotionally heavy situation. Puedes seguir, Ruby.
Ok. Mi esposo es campesino y se dañó su rodilla en el trabajo por tanto tiempo que trabajó tan duro en su trabajo, ya que eran muy frágiles sus huesos. Aparte de que mi esposo trabajaba de 50 a 60 horas semanales sin pago de overtime. Ese tratamiento es inhumano, es muy frecuente en nuestra comunidad.
Okay, lo voy a traducir, okay?
Okay.
My husband is currently a farm worker and he hurt his knee at work. From working so long and so hard at his job, his bones are very brittle. My husband works 50 to 60 hours a week without overtime pay. This is inhumane treatment and it is very prevalent in our community. Puedes seguir, Ruby.
Okay. Yo tuve que ser ama de casa porque no teníamos con qué pagar el cuidado de niños. Yo empecé mi propio negocio porque es la única manera en que pude trabajar a mis horas y estar con mi familia. Pero mi esposo, quien trabaja en el campo, todavía se merece el pago de overtime.
Okay, lo voy a traducir. Oh, okay. I became a housewife because there was no money to pay for childcare and the basic necessities. I started my own business because it was the only way I can work my own hours and be with my family. But my husband still works in the fields, still deserves to be paid overtime pay. Puedes seguir.
Okay. Les pido que apoyen el pago de overtime del tiempo extra para campesinos después de las 40 horas. Los campesinos trabajan bien duro y honestamente afuera en condiciones muy difíciles cuando tengamos pago de overtime.
Muchas
Por
gracias.
fin vamos a... Okay.
Dígame. Diga.
Okay. Por fin vamos a poder estar más tiempo para descansar y poder vivir más sanos. Gracias.
Gracias. I ask you to vote in favor of House Bill 4002. Farm workers work very hard in very difficult conditions. When we have been paid overtime pay, we will finally be able to have more time to rest and be able to live a healthier life. Thank you.
Thanks, Brittany, for sharing those testimonies. So yeah, these are 3 different testimonies. You heard 2 from members who are friends of family farmers, and a member of PCUN, a farm worker who was able to share in Spanish. And you were able to see some of the translation that happens when a public hearing is available for testimonies. And I want to also just hear from you all around what are some of the things that you heard in the testimony that you noticed that is common amongst the 3 testimonies, differences that you noticed, reactions that you had to the testimonies, and just the overall process of what it looked like for the public hearing we shared with you all. So I'm just wanted to open it up to hear from you all directly. What is it that you're hearing from these testimonies, things that you've noticed?
I guess I'll go ahead and share. I just really noticed, and I guess was heartened by the fact that it seemed that people really told personal stories. And of course, they prepared and tried to make those stories as succinct as possible for the legislative session. But I thought that was really impactful.
Thanks, Laura. And I also see Sarah added a couple comments in the chat. Personal impact, concise, and focus on the bill, which is very accurate when it comes to oral testimonies and testifying, because you do have a limited amount of time, and you're also able to submit testimony that as however long you want to share your story, but you have to be selective about what you can share in front of a committee because of the limited time. But you don't have that limitation of time, and you can add as many text pages, reasoning, and of your story through the written testimony that's also submitted and reviewed by the committee on these bills. But yeah, what did other folks hear? What did they think about the testimonies? If we can hear from maybe one other person.
They're very persuasive.
Thanks, Carly. And I think, as Sarah mentioned, the way that people are persuaded by these stories is really the personal impact and how it's affecting them directly. And I can share as advocates, we help provide testimony guides to give a little bit of guidance around how to structure their testimony and some like high level ideas. But ultimately, the more personal you get with your testimony is the more impact and the more reactions you'll get from the legislators in the committee. And so again, I can't stress enough how personal and individual your testimonies can be, and not always having to follow exactly what's in the guide, but using it as a spark of inspiration for what you could be sharing on your own testimony. And I see Laura had a question in the chat. When people submit oral testimony with translation, are they given more time to account for that translation time? And the answer is they're given the same amount of testimony time, but in terms of like, it will take longer to get it translated. So they'll still get, for instance, if everyone has a minute and a half to testify, they'll get the same minute and a half to testify, but it will just take 3 minutes to get through their testimony for the actual translation. And being able to share in a language that folks are comfortable with is something that we have been really pushing for at PCUN, since many of our members are Spanish speakers or non-English speakers. And historically, we've been able to support with the interpretation, but as you've heard from Laura earlier from LPRO, they're actively working to have their own interpreters to support in this area. And I think as we continue to make the Capitol and the legislative session more accessible to all communities in Oregon, we'll continue improving our systems so we can account for all the communities who live in our great state.
All right, if there's anything else, any other questions about oral testimony, we can move on to the written testimony.
Do we have any idea what kind of oral testimony might be submitted or presented in opposition to the bill? And should we be prepared to counter that from a strategy perspective as we are doing testimony in favor of?
That is a really great point. I think both yes and no. And Alice Taylor, also feel free to jump in to give your own perspectives. You can, the reason I say partially say no is because you can focus specifically on why you think you're in support of your stance, and share those and really focus on like the personal testimony. But if you are working either with myself or Alice or someone else in one of our organizations, as you're preparing for the testimony and maybe something stuck out from your testimony that we want to like really emphasize and highlight in your testimony. And an example of that is when Kate gave their testimony, they shared about I think there was like the price points, the price parity. I forgot the exact term, but that's something that we have been hearing from opposition or folks who are in opposition to farm worker overtime, and sharing that was able to counter it without necessarily directing it at the oppositional testimony, but rather saying it in a more general sense of why you believe, yes, it's possible, or the reasons why you're in favor. But Alice Taylor, also feel free to jump in.
Yeah, those are all really great points, Ira. I was just going to add, usually usually the chair will try and do a panel of opposition and then a panel of support when they do public testimony. But I'll say normally what I like to do is usually put somebody at the end of a panel, usually myself or Alice or other strong advocates who can bat cleanup, so that folks don't have to, you all can share your stories and don't have to worry about knocking down opposition talking points in the testimony process. But we'll also make sure that folks have some good sense about what our opposition is likely to say on all of the bills that FoFF is working on, so that you'll be able to incorporate those into your plan testimony and don't have to wing it or go off in the moment during the testimony.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Taylor.
I just wanted to add that I think that sometimes FoFF, when making you aware and preparing you for testimony and making you aware of what the opposition might say, we might point out things about your story in particular, details that we want you to include because they actively counteract an argument from the opposition. So just by telling your story and making sure that you include those details about your personal experience that are counter to the narrative that the opposition is putting out, you've debunked their point without devoting time to addressing their argument head on.
So for the written testimony, we actually have Kate's written testimony on farm worker overtime, and we're just going to put that in the chat so you can look at it at another time. But it has the same points, but Kate had shortened her testimony for it fitting into 2 minutes. So you'll be able to see kind of the difference in the written and the oral testimony. But Now, Ira, do you want me to share? Do you want to share your template? And you can kind of go through the written template and what's important.
Yeah, if you can share your screen, I don't have it up in front of me right now.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So as you can see here on your screen, and we'll also share in the chat shortly, this is a guide that we created for organizations, individuals, groups who wanted to submit testimony in support of farm worker overtime. And so at the very top, we just have some important information that folks should be aware of in terms of really making their testimony as personalized as possible. Again, we stressed that throughout the whole process. The more personal, the more impactful it'll be towards the legislative session. Also want to make sure folks are aware that by submitting written or testifying in front of a committee, it is public information at that point. So we always want to be aware that that's something that is a reality. And any personal information you wouldn't want the public to see. So that's something important to keep in mind. And lastly, if folks want additional support, we also have someone who can provide that support. And in this case was my colleague, Liz Marquez. It has important links to where folks can submit their testimony and how to submit it, as well as the deadlines for submitting that testimony. Now, as we look at this sample testimony, we really try to keep it vague and high level because again, we don't want to do the talking or provide the testimony for folks, rather give them the inspiration so that they can craft their own stories. And so as you can see, and as you heard when folks were testifying, one of the first things is addressing the committee. So in this case, co-chairs Taylor and Hovey and members of the Joint Committee on Farm Worker Overtime, just so folks know who you're speaking with. And then the introduction, as I mentioned, my name is Ira and I live in Salem, Oregon, and I'm writing on behalf of, if you're writing for an organization, for instance, Friends of Family Farmers, or just on behalf of your own business as well, or yourself. And then you give your stance around what you're talking to them about. And so in this case, in support of farm worker overtime, being able to receive overtime pay after 40 hours in a work week at 1.5 times pay the employees' regular rate of pay. And then it's the section where folks can get personal with their own testimony. And we provided some general talking points that they can refer to when writing their testimony. And when we did the farm worker overtime campaign, there are 4 different themes for why farm workers are members, and we saw as important and key messages to include for this policy. 1, it being about equality and justice. 2, it being about health and wellness. 3, quality of life. And 4, the economic aspect of the policy. So having stronger and living wages. And under each one, you can see a couple talking points that folks can refer to without necessarily going into the weeds or the details about specific reasons why people support. Because we want to leave that open to the folks who are writing the testimony to make it as personal and customized as they would like to make it. And then concluding their testimony by urging the committee to vote yes on the bill number, in this case, HB 4002, to pass farm worker overtime. So that's a testimony guide. It's in the chat. Folks want to review it to see how we structure testimonies. And I believe I see a question in the chat. Sarah says, is there any work happening that influence other like-minded lobbyists that can also provide a positive support link for us Who do we need to woo in our favor in addition to the committee members and such?
Taylor, do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I will just say, you know, we definitely will be working with a coalition of folks and trying to identify likely and unlikely partners on all of Friends of Family Farmers legislative priorities. And so we're still in those early stages, but we'll definitely be incorporating the political power of not only this organization, but other organizations and partnership opportunities all throughout the session on, you know, all of the legislative priorities that FoFF is working on.
Yeah, and just to take that one step further, I think something that we do, and I know that PCUN does, is that we work in coalition constantly year round. We are in regular communication with lots of other organizations, both with more lobbying capacity and less lobbying capacity than FoFF or PCUN. And we work really hard to keep each other apprised of our movements. I know, I mean, we are here doing this event together today. We also have, you know, been meeting throughout the year to talk about what we have planned and what goes on in both of our focus areas. And I know that both our organizations, well, FoFF and I can only speak for FoFF, obviously, but we are part of many formal coalitions, including like the Oregon Community Food Systems Network and the Oregon Conservation Network and the Oregon Organic Coalition and lots of other formal coalitions that build those bridges, as well as, you know, constant outreach to make sure that everybody in our orbit and in the same universe as us knows what we're working on.
And I just put in the chat, we have some more events coming up, and one of them is about working together. It's the Coalition Partner Legislative Priorities, and that's in January for the information. But we do have an information coming up on Thursday, which Sarah will be there to talk to us about raw milk. And then we have on the 3rd, engaging with the media, kind of the importance of storytelling. So moving to the next step of making your voice heard with the media. So we're coming up on time. Wow, that went really fast. Thank you so much, Ira, for being here and sharing with us your really great perspective, and Taylor, of course, and Alice. We've got, like I said, a couple events coming up. If you're interested in all the stuff that we're working on, we've got Farm Direct, raw milk. We've got a lot of stuff that we're working on, and we'll keep a tab on the website for all the issues that we're working on. So you can just go to our website and kind of keep up to date. We'll keep that going with all the updates, all the links to written testimony you can do. You'll definitely be hearing from us, and it's really important to stay involved come January. So thank you so much for being here. Please reach out if you have any questions. I'll send an email, a follow-up email to all of you with all of the links and important stuff that we talked about today. But yeah, if you have any questions or need some help or just want some advice about giving testimony, we're always here. It sounds like Ira's open to being reached out to as well. So thank you so much, and hopefully we'll see you on Thursday.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. That was very good.
Thank you, team.
Yep.
See you Thursday.
Yeah, absolutely.